this.
Okay.
So I think the first thing to sort of start with is that there are very, very, very many things in the world at the moment that make people angry. And obviously you see the cuts to services, attacks and pay and conditions in the workplace. Might be things like sexual harassment in the street, environmental destruction. I think that you've seen the big demonstrations against fracking in Manchester last week, continuing war and imperialism. And I think any of these can be a spark to somebody to make them think, actually, things need to change. Things can't continue in the way that they currently are. And I think part of our job as revolutionaries is to say, yes, change is necessary. But I think part of our job is not just to argue that change is necessary, but that we need a total transformation of society. It's not just that we can change one little thing, but we do need to change everything. And I think it's also about putting an argument that's not just that necessary change, but also that change is possible. Many people I think can accept that things are bad and do need to change, but don't feel that they have the power to bring about this. And I think that one of our jobs is to say about how the actions of the working class can act to transform society. In the opening chapter of Lukács's book on Lenin, this opening chapter is called The Actuality of Revolution. I think here he's talking about how Lenin saw that the reality of capitalism means that revolution is actually on the cards. The capitalism doesn't just contain the misery of the proletariat, but it also contains the revolutionary element that can bring down the old order. Lukács then goes on to say, the actuality of revolution therefore implies that a study of each individual daily problem in concrete association with the socio-historic whole as moments in the liberation of the proletariat. And I think what this quote to me suggests two things. I think it highlights the importance of coming up with some kind of analysis that shows how all the things that make people angry in society, the daily grind of things that make people angry and want to change things, are all connected to one another. And I think it's about coming up with some kind of totalising analysis to understand how all of these things are connected. And I think that's what Marxism is trying to do. I think it also points to the importance for us as revolutionaries in participating and trying to shape the many struggles that do exist, that can seem quite separate and individual, by showing that all of these struggles are connected, even if they don't necessarily seem that they are. And I think by having this analysis that shows the connectedness of sort of all the bad things in society, how capitalism is the root of all of the problems in society, but also that the different struggles come together. So that the revolutionary transformation society is needed to overcome these problems. I think all the individual problems, and it points to that we need to have a systemic change if we are going to get rid of capitalism as the cause of many of the problems that we see in society. Now, I think when you sort of say to people revolution, I think it can seem quite a sort of scary word. I know when I was with my mum, I was saying, oh yeah, we set up a new revolutionary organisation back in January. She's like, oh, revolution, it sort of sounds a bit scary. And I think that that's not entirely unjustifiable. I think if you look at sort of the way revolutions have played out in the past, I think there is, like, they don't play out in the sort of nicest ways all the time. But I think why I think the notion of revolution is quite exciting and quite a positive thing is what we're talking about is the genuine emancipation of the whole of humanity, and I think that's something that's worth fighting for. I think it's quite a positive vision, I think, for the world. And I think there's a nice a quote from Trotsky I found recently, which I think it's quite a nice one, saying that he's talking about, it's in a piece about revolutionary correspondence, which I'll come along to a little bit later. But he talks about sort of forcing open the gates to the realm of the future, and I think that's what I think revolutionary transformation is about. It's about opening the possibilities that are there in the potential within the world, but that because of the realities of capitalism and oppression and exploitation mean that they don't exist. I think we have a role in trying to convince people that revolution is both desirable and possible, but I think we also have to accept that however good a meeting we put on, however good our publications are, and so on, is not going to bring about a revolution. I think in a revolution situation, most people will have never heard of Marx, Lenin, and I think we recognise that it's the struggle that transforms people. The struggle is what transforms consciousness. And so to me, I think that the centrality of struggle in transforming consciousness is what means that for revolutionaries today, it's crucial that we play an active part in workplace organisation, in campaigns, in social movements. So it's not just turning up to participate them in a way that's sort of quite passive, in that we just go to meetings, and that it's quite unconnected from our role as revolutionaries. That we come to meetings like this day, and we go and participate in something else on the other day. We participate in these struggles in organisations as revolutionaries, but we're doing it as people who are actually part of them, not just sort of people who turn up with a leaflet and stand outside and say, like, this is what you're all doing wrong, you should just listen to us, because no one's going to listen to you if you just do that. And I think we have to be active participants, and because that allows us the opportunity to try and inject revolutionary politics into these struggles, and to try and shape them. And I think it also allows us the opportunity to try and draw together different kinds of struggles, be it against racism, against cuts, austerity. And I think raising the question of solidarity is quite a crucial one in doing that. I think by being active part of these kind of struggles, from that also means that we need to learn from the class. I think we can't do that if we're outside of these struggles, and as well as sort of learning from the class by doing that, I think we can also bring our past experiences, other theory that we may have, to help us develop an understanding and analysis about the world as it is now, to think better about how we can go about changing it. I think it's really important that we base our understanding about the world on reality, not just how we'd like it to be, because this fits with our sort of theory, or how we thought it might be, how we think it is based on our experiences from like 20 or 30 years ago. Things are constantly changing, and so I think to better understand and try and change the world, we need to actually understand how the world is now. And that we can't do this in abstraction from sort of just being active participants in the struggles that are taking place. I think by developing a kind of understanding and analysis about the world, this helps us to develop ideas about what kind of things are strategically important, what tactics we should be using. And this comes from both sort of theoretical understanding from historical examples and our active practice now. I think that it's important that these things are subject to open debate and discussion, because this, I think, can help us to either confirm that we were right in what we thought in the first place, or decide that it was really stupid ideas. But obviously, just discussing it isn't enough, and the ideas need to be tested in practice. I think with RS21 we're at an exciting point where I think we can creatively think about what we do as a small revolutionary organisation. I don't think anybody, me or anybody else, has all of the answers at the moment, and I think we're at the stage where questions are quite important, and asking the right questions is as important, to some extent, as having the answers. I think, as I sort of said a little bit before, is that the importance of learning from the class, as well as using experiences that have been gained over decades, is quite a crucial thing about what we're currently doing. I think we need to have the humility in what we're doing, accepting that we don't know everything, that we can learn from other people, take in ideas. I think also about being realistic about what we can achieve as a small group, about what resources we have, what our sizes, where best we can have an impact in what we're doing. But at the same time as being realistic, we should also not be afraid to be audacious and experiment. I think we can try out new ways of presenting information about getting involved with campaigns. I think what's important is that we're testing things out and learning from the experiences and not being afraid to do that. I think as a small group, I think we have sort of audacity is quite important. I think we can be the people involved with campaigns, and we should have the confidence to do that, to suggest ideas and try and take a lead to advance the struggle. I think this can be on a grand scale, but they can also be quite small things. I think, like, for example, I'm a UCU member at Cambridge University, and on the second 2-hour strike, we were having a meeting in a sort of union hut, which is like a prefab hut I heard from like the 50s or something. And that's what we were doing as the sort of strike day. And so suggesting that we should maybe have a picket line. I think that's the revolutions can sort of suggest these things, because we understand that picket lines are quite a useful way of bringing people together, having a visible presence and that kind of stuff. So it didn't seem particularly audacious, but in the context of our UCU branch, it was quite a big step forward. And it meant that there was a small picket line, but there was a group of, sort of 40 teenage school children who were visiting the university, and so rather than crossing that picket line, we had a conversation with them about why we were on strike and the importance of workers taking action, and then got their teachers to talk about why the teachers were taking strike. And so I turned out it was quite good kind of thing. And I think the notion of audacity comes from having a vision and a strategy about what kind of activity can be useful in raising the confidence and consciousness of the class. I think it's important that we're putting our politics into practice. So this means that we have to take up all struggles against oppression and exploitation, to argue for genuine forms of democracy, both within what we're doing as RS21 and within campaigns and struggles that we're involved with. And the other important thing is to break down the divisions that can exist and often do between those who sort of do activity and those who think about what we should be doing. I think we're too small a group for this not to be an option for a start, but I think it also it goes deeper to a part about what revolutionary practice. I think one way, partly because I've been involved with doing this stuff around the RS21 website, that one of the things I think is quite useful for trying to do this is to help to develop everybody in the group and beyond as capable of writing reports, analysis, commentary for the website and print publications. I think you're having a writing day school sort of in April, and I think that's one good way to try and help people feel confident that they have the skills to do this. I think writing, or even doing things like making videos and things, I think we do have the option to sort of not just write things, can help with people's political development, because it encourages reflection about what you've been doing, trying to write something so other people understand it. I think can help you realise where you don't understand things, and I think it can help you then to sort of think about what the weaknesses were in what you were doing in a sort of demo or campaign or something that can help strengthen those in the future. For me, I think the kind of writing that we should perhaps be encouraging is not just saying X, Y and Z happened. There's lots of other news sources who can say there were these things happening, but that doesn't negate obviously the importance of reporting about things that won't get reported otherwise. But I think there should be a priority on trying to do things that help deepen our understanding so as to better act and appraise situations that are happening, help us putting forward our ideas to people that we're working with and are interested in the kind of things that we're doing. And so I think that's one of the things I've written about previously is about the need for accurate reporting, because I think that's about both being able to sort of honestly appraise situations, but also making people that we're working with trust us. Because if they know that there were not 10,000 people in a demo, there were actually sort of 2,000, why else would they listen to anything else that we're saying? So I think But I think we have to understand that the reason we're writing anything or doing the things is because we're wanting to change things. Trotsky has a nice quote in the article about revolutionary correspondence. So, well, it's a speech he was giving to a gathering of worker correspondents in 1924, saying, "We revolutionists, in the area of writing as in others, give first priority to the will to act, to change something, to bring something about, to achieve something." And I think, as revolutionary socialists, we're trying to transform the world. It's not the easiest of tasks, I think we all appreciate that. And I think with R21, I think we're in quite an exciting but early stage in what we're doing. I think there is the potential to try and build something that's rooted in struggle, that's open to learning from the lessons of new experiences, learning from them to think about how we can raise the confidence and consciousness of the working class, and think about how we bring around revolutionary transformation of society and win others to this idea as well. I think we have to have optimism about the sort of potential for struggle in the working class. I didn't have time to put it down, but there's a CERN who's coming from London. He's written a nice article about what's happening in Bosnia at the moment. And in it, it's got an example of miners from a town in Tulsa, where there's a lot of the struggles in Bosnia going on at the moment, who themselves at the time they had very little, but they did a big collection for the 1984 miners' strike in Britain. And I think that we can see that the working class does have the potential for solidarity and to take action. And I think that's something that should give us, I suppose, hope and confidence that about the potential for revolutionary transformation of society.
Last year was a bit of a crazy year for a lot of us in this room. I spent my time drinking a lot, smoking a lot of weed and doing a lot of reading in my own corner. And one of the books I came across was a book by a revolutionary called Daniel Ben Said in France. It was his memoirs, one of the best books I've read in a long while. And in it, he went through a lot of experiences. He was in France in '68. He broke with the Stalinists over their position on the French colonial occupation of Algeria, and he had loads of experiences in Latin America in terms of the struggle there. And in his book, he's got a quote that I want to read out. It says, "It's not a question of, to be a revolutionary is not a question of devoting oneself to this or that fetish, taking up a sublime cause, but rather of being unreconciled to the world as it is. If the world is not acceptable, you must undertake to change it. With no certainty of success, it goes without saying, there is no escaping that logic. When you believe you are solemnly crossing the threshold of commitment quite freely, you are already underway head first." Now, I think that's a good starting point in terms of asking the question, what does it mean to be a revolutionary socialist in the 21st century? Because it's essentially starting from the point of irreconcilability, two questions of oppression, two questions of exploitation, to the repression that was inflicted on students in the recent Cops Off Campus campaigns and stuff like this, as some of the key forces that drive revolutionaries and drive people to enter the realm of revolutionary politics. But I think we also, like Amy was stressing, go beyond that. We are revolutionary socialists, we are Marxists, and there are some key things that we do stand for. We talk about the self-emancipation of the working class being the act of the working class. We stand for mass revolution. We stand for the type of things we're seeing in Egypt today. We talk about building a new society from the bottom up. We talk about building a new democratic society from the bottom up. We talk about the Soviets in Russia, talk about different experiments that have happened in Latin America over the last 10 years, talking about different societies that have experienced revolutions and experienced ordinary working class people taking control over their own lives. This is one of the core principles of our politics. But we also talk about some of the failed experiments that have happened in history. We talk about the revolutionary rehearsals, the experiences of countries like Chile, the experiences of countries like Iran, where revolutions were crushed, where working class people took control, who were rooted, who had the confidence in their workplace, who had confidence in their workplaces, and who could tackle some of the unevenness within the working class. And we understand that if we want to see a successful socialist revolution, for that to be achievable, that mass revolutionary organisation has to exist. Now, stating all of that, we also have to understand how far away we are from a lot of those questions. We aren't in Britain, per se, near the existence of a mass revolutionary socialist organisation. I suppose I'm sceptical of being near a mass revolution itself at the moment, but these are things that we have to constantly build and struggle and strive for, whilst understanding where we're at the moment, not just in terms of the struggle, but also in terms of revolutionaries themselves. Different questions about the levels of working class struggle at the point of production and how it's been low for quite a long period of time. The fragmentation of the anti-austerity movement, for example, the fragmentation of the revolutionary left, for example, are big questions that face revolutionary socialists today, and are big defining features of what it means to be a revolutionary socialist today, as we sort of work our way through the mud and try and grapple with those questions. And I think, like Amy said, we have to be honest around that and say, one of the good things is that we have a lot of questions, and we also need to try and grapple with some of the answers and stuff like that. So I suppose I want to say, what does this mean for RS21 in particular? Because I think the key thing is we see that fragmentation of an anti-austerity movement. We don't see any big national focus in the struggle, say in Britain today, for example. People in localities have to be given the space to relate to different struggles and local specificities that come up. And I think that's key, because I think one of the problems of the experience of the revolutionary left over the last 2 years is something that a friend to me explained of small cell mentality. If you go into prison, you got one person that you speak to all the time in your cell, or maybe two, and then you come out of prison and you find it very hard to communicate to people you might know very well. We spent the revolutionary left spent a lot of time talking to itself over the last 2 years. So we have to break out of a small cell mentality and start relating to the struggle and relating to people, to inform some of the debates we're having. And we have to do that. I think revolutionaries have to do that quite. We have to be quite targeted about that. I think the revolutionary left right now is. I think Amy touched upon this. The revolutionary left right now is significantly smaller than it was, or is significantly more fragmented than it was, which means people do have to. We can't do everything, and we have to relate to what we're able to relate to based on the limited number of forces we actually have within our movement. And I think we have to do that. I think Amy's, again, I find myself agreeing with Amy quite a bit. I think Amy's absolutely correct. I think the central question isn't how you turn up to things, make a big hoorah speech and sit as a passive observer, but how you begin to develop roots, develop implantation, and develop a trust with the people you're involved in campaigns and involved in struggles with. So, all that being said, you don't explicitly need an RS21 to do all that. If we're honest, we can all be activists within our thing and relate to this and that. We don't necessarily need an RS21. And I think then there comes the question of, well, what's the point of RS21? And I think that's a question that activity informs. And I think that also informs that activity. Is I think we've gone through a period of our movement with a whole number of unanswered questions, and we've stagnated and we've fallen behind on a whole number of questions, and we've failed to adapt to changing circumstances. And I suppose there are two tasks for revolutionaries. I think two dominant tasks for revolution. Well, not revolutionaries, for RS21 in particular. I think there are two dominant tasks. I think the first is learning the experience. In the process of learning the experience of revolutionary organisations historically, one of the things that's always struck me, whether we're talking about the Bolsheviks, whether we're talking about the International Socialists, who are the forerunner to the SWP, is trying to grapple with the key questions of the day. Now, in the 50s and the 60s, that would have been class nature of Soviet Russia. I don't think that's the crucial question for us at the moment. Now there's a whole number of those questions. It was also understanding reformism and understanding the developments that were happening within the trade union movement and stuff like that. And I think for us, we have to go through a very similar process. We have to be constantly trying to understand the period, make ourselves practically but also politically relevant to struggles, but also going one further in terms of relating to those people within those struggles that are the most militant and the most wanting to fight back, and saying we have an analysis that goes beyond a particular struggle within a workplace, a particular struggle on a campus or a particular campaign, and always bringing it back to an analysis of the world. And it's also a question of avoiding the potential for Russification, the potential to not being able to adapt to a changing world. Capitalism is constantly dynamic. We always talk about capitalism being constantly dynamic. Unfortunately, revolutionaries haven't always been constantly dynamic as well, which means they've been left behind. And I think that's one of the key things we have to start trying to build. And for me, that's two things. That's developing a current. That's developing a revolutionary current that's able to understand the challenges of the world, grappling with the key political questions, the nature of class consciousness, what forms of democratic power are developing within different struggles. People were talking about anti-politics, loads of these different questions that we need to try and grapple with. And I think at the heart of that, and I think at the heart of, particularly if we get past the sort of romanticisation and the fetishism of the Bolsheviks, if you actually look at the experience of the Bolsheviks, a lot of ordinary working class people finding themselves in struggles in their workplace, relating to the politics of the Bolsheviks, and developing into what Paul LeBlanc calls worker intellectuals through the experience of the Bolsheviks, the debates within the Bolsheviks, the branch meetings and stuff like that. I mean, it's a crude way of putting it, but and I think that's one of the things that needs to be central. If we talk about, to the group, if we talk about trying to understand the world, trying to engage in the debates that are coming up, we have to make sure in such a small unit of revolutionary socialists, everybody feels that they're a part of those debates. So when we have a publication that goes out, the debates have to be within that publication, debates around strategies within the movement have to be within that publication, everybody has to be writing, doing meetings, like these sorts of things. Like the writing school is fantastic because it means it's contributing towards breaking down the unevenness that exists within capitalist society itself. Working class people, people that are oppressed, are constantly harrowed down by capitalism, socialised, what the wobbly is called head fixed, and we have to a revolutionary organisation has to tackle that and has to be able to fight against that and make sure everyone's in a position to be contributing towards the politics of a group. And that also means that trying to root ourselves in struggle, trying to understand the mood of our comrades and colleagues within our fields of struggle, and constantly trying to relate that back to the analysis that we're trying to develop of the world and that is constantly changing of the world. So that's part of what I think it needs to be a revolutionary socialist in the 21st century. But if that's one of the central things, then we're talking about how we're constantly learning from the class, how we're constantly relating that experience to a wider picture, and how we're applying it to new lessons within the struggle, new struggles that develop up. Essentially the relationship between organisation and struggle, party and class, that sort of thing. So I want to pose a question, and I want to come back to Daniel Ben-Said's memoirs to pose a question. In his memoirs he writes, "I have no religious sense of redemptive suffering. I have never conceived of my commitments as asceticism or reparation. I have never taken views of intellectual poverty of chastity. As a young communist, I took an immediate dislike to the bureaucratic bigotry of the Stalinist priests and its Maoist counterpart. The young Red Guards in their French version, hymning the thoughts of the great helmsman, were odious to me. These little monks who gave their person to the cause. It never occurred to me to sacrifice as such ventriloquist idols. Political militancy for me is the opposite of a sad passion, a joyous experience despite its bad moments. My party, like that of Hein, is the party of flowers and nightingales." it's a bit of a long-winded quote, but like I think the point of what he's trying to get at there is, or the point what I got from that is, Daniel Ben Said went through an experience that many revolutionaries of that generation went through, with a complete disillusionment in the main political organisations that existed, reformists, Stalinists, because of consistent sellouts, an unwillingness to really combat the ills that saw in society. The tradition we come out of was a part of that. Many young people were attracted to the Socialist Review Group, to the International Socialists, on the basis of an analysis of Stalinism, a reformism, and an engagement in a struggle that made no concessions to either, made no concessions to Stalinism and made no concessions to reformism, and constantly stressing working class agency. Now that is what hundreds of young people identified within the IS and the SRG. The question that I want to pose is, what could potentially hundreds of young angry workers and students and the like identify with revolutionaries today? What could push them to identify with revolutionaries today? Now, people have talked about anti-politics. People have talked about the idea that the shift of reformist social democrats to the right, to capitulate into neoliberalism, has meant that loads of working class people feel completely detached from their organised political representative, social democracy, and no longer recognise them as the political expression of their class, essentially. Now, this is far from anti-political. The fact that it's called anti-politic doesn't mean it's anti-political. If you look at the Indignados movement, Occupy, where loads of people are completely frustrated with the mainstream political parties like the Social Democrats, within those struggles, they're constantly talking about politics. They're constantly talking about big political questions, little strategic questions. There's a constant political debate within those struggles. And I suppose I want to pose that question about how we relate to young angry workers today in a way that other organisations have done in the past. Because it isn't simply moving on to do the old things in a different way. It's fundamentally thinking through that relationship between revolutionary organisation and between struggle, and how they relate, and how we base ourselves without submitting any of our principles to anything, but how we base ourselves on the new forms of struggle that come up, and how we relate to them, and how we get that relationship correct.